Hi family, my name is Peter and I'm an alcoholic. I'm glad she said I've been sober for a while because sanity is another issue, but that's an ongoing process with me. God, you guys look great. You know, my book tells me that you're the bright spot of my day, and that's true every day when I come in here. Before I get started, I like to do the same thing that my sponsor in Texas used to do, and that's look around the room and just appreciate everyone that's here and everything that you've done for me. He pointed out to me that word appreciate's a pretty damn good word. It means to grow in value. And that's what's happened over the years in the 3 places that I've lived in this country. So far, actually this building is now, I've been sober long in North Carolina than I have in any other part of the country. So you might all just get stuck with me for a while because I seem to like a lot of things here. So anyhow, my sobriety date is February 7th of 1994. I sobered up in Abilene, Texas. I was born in Connecticut, so I've done a little bit of traveling during my drinking career, and this is my home group. Let me tell you what my sponsor told me in Texas when I moved for the first time, what to look for in a home group. Doesn't make it the best group, doesn't make it the worst group, but it sure does make it the group I want to be a part of. I remember the first time that I showed up at this building, somewhere around late 2005, after I moved here from Texas with my daughters. And I was coming down the front stairs there, and I'm going to clean it up just a little bit for the population in here tonight. And in short order, it said, someone made the comment, those people in there just don't know what the hell they're doing. And the first thing that came to my mind was, man, that ought to be worth at least $1. And they're already practicing Tradition 9. They're not organized, so let's see what we can find out in here. And what I found then was the same thing that I see now, only different faces. Young people, in-between people, fossils, and all points in between. And what I discovered was that AA is in pretty damn good hands. I have a sponsor. My sponsor has a sponsor. And beyond that, we do go into the fossil arena. So he's up in New Jersey right now, sunning himself on the beach the last time I saw. But it's just, it's a pleasure to come in here and share my story. Because the first time I was in this building was somewhere around the springtime, I believe, of 2006, shortly after I moved here with my girls. The 3 of them were sitting over here. And wasn't a real pleasant part of my life, but I'm glad they were with me. It certainly was a part of my life where I was emerging out from underneath some pretty dark circumstances. But I'm going to go back a little bit farther and just qualify myself. I do belong here. I am an alcoholic. Drugs are a part of my story. I'll just tell you that up front, and I'll avoid that as much as possible. I was born into an Irish Catholic, Canadian French Catholic family. To say that I was predisposed to have a drink or downright thirsty when I hit this planet would be an understatement. I was uncomfortable with everything and everybody. I'm told I acted out long before I could remember acting out. I don't remember an awful lot of my childhood up until about 6 or so years old. My biological father was a skirt-chasing, power-drinking executive. And the things that I do remember are feelings and sensations of fear. The 3 emotions the big book gives me as far as being restless, irritable, and discontent, all wrapped up in fear as a child. Thank God my mother got us out of that scenario. It was just myself and my younger brother at the time. And then I began to find these outlets that I could hide behind. I could perform in sports, music. I was a pretty good student. And I became a very performance-oriented individual. Up until about the age of, let me back up a little bit. My stepfather came into the picture at about 7 or 8 years old. My mother and my younger brother were just real content with this situation and happy about that. He was a corporate pilot. He brought a lot of stability into the family, discipline, and that was the last thing that I'd ever been exposed to. So I rebelled like hell against that structure. What was interesting as I was growing up is that, my parents would have parties twice a month or so downstairs in the rec room, and I'd rebel to this man's face, but I would sit at the top of the stairs as a small boy, and I would listen for when he spoke in these parties. And it was kind of like E.F. Hutton. He started talking, everybody else shut up. And it wasn't until I was almost 3 years sober before we had that conversation. And it's amazing what people know about you and don't tell you and let you experience the pain in order to get well. I was about 16 years old and had the world before me, I really did. Scholarships, good academics, and scholarships in sports. Had a genetic situation step into my life, and a minor accident in football took all that away. And that's when God and I parted. Or that's when the part began. I really had my first drink exposed to any volume of alcohol somewhere around 14 or 15 years old. I remember drinking with a bunch of guys down at the skating pond in Connecticut, and I think I was the only one who drank enough to puke, got real sick, and got up like just the rest of you guys do the next day saying, man, I got to do that again. And that's where it all started for me, because I felt good, didn't remember what I did. Apparently I was pretty damn entertaining, and I was okay with that. Got a little wild when I lost all those opportunities, and my father told me that I wasn't going to work in a gas station or a retail outlet or anything like that. So he says, you're going into the military. So I graduated high school at 17 and a half, and the Air Force became my rehab center. And I went to basic training down in San Antonio. And we put in our wish list. I ended up in, the base isn't there anymore, but I was in Colorado for tech school. And put in my wish list for Hawaii, Southern California, and one other place, I forget about it, in the tropics somewhere. And they ended up right over here at No Hope Pope in Fayetteville. That's what we affectionately called it back then. I got there in 1972. Richard Nixon was president then, started de-escalating the Vietnam War, and I got out of a 6-year hitch after 2. One of the things I had started doing was playing music. I actually was a professional musician from about the age of 12. I'm a drummer, and I was actually making more money on a Friday and a Saturday night playing music than I was all month long in the Air Force. And so when they gave me an opportunity to get out, I took it. I got to travel the country for about 2.5 years and up into Canada, and played a lot of places. Did the Grand Ole Opry once when Minnie Pearl was still looking pretty good. Of course, I've been told that that's probably the alcohol that we were drinking, because she never looked pretty good. But I had some opportunities to do some things, recording studios and things of that nature, but I was a young kid with a pocket full of money, making more money than most executives in the United States, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to party in the bars, I wanted to play in the big stages, and I wanted to do all that stuff. I had no desire for structure. It was all about escape. It was all about attention. I wanted to be somebody, but I never wanted to grow. And so that just went on in my career. After that, I took a position with a manufacturing company up in Connecticut. Let me just say this before I keep going. I have never gotten in my entire lifetime what I deserve. And I'm going to put that in the context of the big book. I've always had more than my fair share of finance and romance. I always got far more than I'd really earned or was qualified for. on the upside, and I always got far less on the consequence side than I should have been given. So I kind of skated through a lot of things for a long time. I was a half measure kind of a guy most of my life. I could do 40, 50 hours worth of work in 20, 25 hours and make it look like I was working the rest of the time. I was the guy that they wanted to take to the marketing meetings at noontime, the 3 martini lunches and all that stuff, because the last man standing, and with some degree of cognitive verbal presence about him, usually made the impression that got us the deal. I was a power drinker from the get-go, and somewhere around the age of about 27 or so, my body began to lose its capacity to process alcohol in the way that it used to when I was 17 and a half when I went into the Air Force. So I found the magic elixirs of speed and cocaine, and it managed to prop me up and keep me drinking longer. And then I'd have to come down and go to sleep, so I'd do some marijuana or some other kind of downer. Well, that was my exposure to drugs. It managed my drinking. It was not a high in and of itself. Better living through chemistry, as I've heard in these rooms. And that went on for a while, and then a friend of mine was part owner in a bar just outside of Hartford, Connecticut, and he was approached by American Airlines to go to work for them down in Dallas. And he went to Dallas, and he called me up about 10 days later and said, "Peter, you have got to come to Texas." Well, I was in Texas in about 2 weeks on about a 3-week vacation. And I remember hanging over the fence, looking at the South Fork Ranch, and saying, "Man, I have got to come here." And so I was in Texas in about, a little less than 90 days after that experience. I got to Texas and I had to shift gears, found myself in an area where there was little manufacturing and a lot of retail, and went to work for an old store chain called Montgomery Ward. At first they wouldn't hire me. They said I was way overqualified for any position in the store. And I said, "Look, I don't have anything to do. There's one manufacturing plant in town and they're shutting down." This was Abilene, Texas, where I sobered up. And so they gave me a job. And I was standing at the front door in a suit not unlike this, taking credit applications for that store, making minimum wage just to get my foot in the door. We had more credit applications at that store than they'd ever had before, and about 1.5 years before the store actually closed, it was actually making a profit, and they wrote me up because we were making a profit, because it was owned by Mobil Oil at the time, and we were supposed to be a tax write-off. We don't make money. So I couldn't win for losing in that situation. And then I met a friend at the end of the parking lot who managed the Firestone store. I didn't know how big the outfit was, pardon me. But we'd been talking one day over lunch, and he was a pilot, and I was doing some flying at the time, both with an airplane and without an airplane. And he said, "I think you just might fit into this organization." So we had 2 interviews, and all we did was talk about flying. Very little about qualifications or anything of that nature. And so finally I called him up about 3 weeks later and said, "Are we going to do this or not?" So he hired me on, and I got introduced to his dad and the other 2 partners that owned the rest of the chain, and the rest was history from there for about the next 8 years or so. I've had a couple of hostages along the way. Let's see, one in North Carolina at No Hope Pope, one in Connecticut, and one in Texas. The gal in Texas is the mother of my 3 daughters, and that I will forever be grateful for. There's my bottoming process began somewhere in about 87 or 88. That was when my first daughter was born. You guys that have girls for kids, you probably know what I'm talking about. Something about a little girl comes into your family that changes you. I saw it with my dad, and my triplet sisters when they arrived. He just was a different guy with them than he was with us. You know, we got thrown into the deep end of the pool to learn how to swim. They got the floaties. And so there was a different perspective here with dads and girls. And that started the change in my life. By this time, my body had really lost its capacity to process alcohol. I was that alcoholic who literally had the hell on earth. Needed to drink, wanted to drink, had all my habits wrapped around drinking. And if I could get one can of beer down a day, I'd be lucky. That went on up until about the end of 93. And January of 94, my wife looked at me and said, you need to leave so that you can go get well and I can get well. And that was a pretty brave thing for this gal to say, because at that time, we had 4 children. She brought a little boy into the marriage. We had the 3 girls. She had no visible means to support herself, but yet she was going to let the breadwinner go out the front door so that somehow she would find a path to being healthy. So there were 2 hospitals in Abilene, Texas, one on the north end of the city and one on the south. I don't know if you're familiar with Abilene. It is right in the heart of Texas. Can't miss it. Unless, of course, you're flying over it at about 35,000 feet, because nothing lands there. I walked out the front door that day, and I headed to the hospital on the north side because they had a rehab up there in the detox. It was about 5 miles from the house, 4 miles from the house, something like that. And when I got to that, in sight of that hospital, you know, the disease doesn't want me to get well. It says, you know, that hospital on the south side of town is a lot newer. Probably got better doctors. All those whispers to keep me from doing something that's good for myself. So I turned around and I started heading to the other hospital, which was about 5 miles in the opposite direction from the house, which put me probably about 8 miles from the hospital. I made it about halfway back, and there was a church that I used to go to with my family, and it was the middle of the week. It was probably a Tuesday, I believe. And I couldn't go any farther. My feet were sore, and my heart was sore, my spirit was sore, and my mind was just chattering. So I sat down on the front steps of this church. No idea why the pastor would drive by that evening or that afternoon, but he did. And he saw me sitting on a church, pulled in the parking lot, and invited me in, and we went in, and that was the first time that I ever broke and was able to tell another man what was going on with me. Well, he made a call to my wife at the time, and she wasn't going to let me back in the house. So he put me up in Abilene's finest. It would be the red light district for about 3 nights and 4 days. And that's another story about how he knows or has connections with that place. But when I got there, it was such a relief to just be able to sit down and relax. And I didn't have to do anything for 3 or 4 days. When I walked into this place, this motel kind of wrapped around in a horseshoe, big pool in the middle, no water in it, barrel down the bottom, bonfire going, and all kinds of aromas coming out of the bottom of that pool, not to mention the music to accompany it, and the laughter and banter and everything else that was going on down there. I was so tired and so sick that I had no desire to participate. He did leave me one number. It was an 800 number, the Alcoholics Anonymous. It took me 24 hours to use that number. And I think part of the reason I used it was because I was getting hungry, literally hungry. And so I called that number, and a fella answered on the other end of the line by the name of Bill. Bill asked me how long it had been since I'd eaten and where I was. And he told me he would be there in an hour. Bill showed up with a sleeve of saltine crackers, a can of Spam, 2 forks, 2 knives, and 2 bottles of water. That was my first AA feast. And Bill came into that room, and he sat down, and he did something that no one else has ever done. just like the big book says. He had sufficient knowledge of himself, and he talked about himself. Never once did he ever point a finger at me, ask me about my condition. He talked about himself and let me either identify with him or not. And for that, I will be eternally grateful. He later became my sponsor. And couldn't stay there for any great length of time. I had to get out. Didn't know where to go. Was kind of looking for somebody else to put me up, you know. That's what we do. Well, that's what I do. That's not what you do. But he said, "Have you considered the Salvation Army?" I said, "What? Have you considered the Salvation Army?" I said, "Okay, if I got to go there, I'll go there." So he went over the house, got a duffel bag full of clothes, came back, dropped it off. I knew where it was. It was about a mile away, and it was right in the middle of the industrial park, about a quarter of a mile down from my office that sat on about the third floor of a bank building. And I'm walking down Industrial Boulevard with this duffel bag, not looking real well, and looking at my feet, because that's all I could look at. I didn't want anyone to recognize me, because I was done. I had no defenses. They were all down, and or so I thought. And shame, humiliation, bewilderment, all that stuff laid on my shoulders real heavy. And then I got to the Salvation Army, and all of a sudden my shoulders went back synthetically, and a little courage came on, synthetic courage. And I went around behind the building, and I dropped that duffel bag off. And I went in the front of the building like I was some damn city inspector, went to the bathroom, walked by this pretty little lieutenant gal that was there, and walked out the front door, went around the building where my duffel bag was, and two thoughts hit me at that point. One was, everything that I had ever done or said in the past was never going to work again. And the one that scared the hell out of me was, I had no idea what would. So I went back in with my duffel bag, and she was sitting there with a smile on her face, expecting me back through the front door. And I ended up staying there for about 3 weeks as a transit, because I had already gotten into a treatment center. It's called the Serenity House. And but they couldn't get me in for 3 weeks. And you know, I really have a resentment about all you folks who get told it's going to be a week or two, and then you go down there and they let you right in. All of a sudden the bed shows up. What the hell's up with that? So anyhow, apparently God wanted to do some work on me. But I roamed the streets for a while, and living there as a transit meant I had to be up at 5 in the morning, could eat breakfast, I had to leave. I'd come back for lunch, I had to leave. I'd come back about 5 o'clock for dinner, I could stay, and I got the cot in the shower at night. Got into the Serenity House, and I felt like I'd arrived at the Marriott. I didn't have to go anywhere. I didn't have to do anything. I had 28 days to live in this building. We were co-ed. We had the detox center down below, and we were separate, at least. Most of us knew what those rules were. But, and that's the first and only place that I had what the big book describes as a spiritual experience. You know, I hear a lot of people describe it as burning bushes and all that stuff, but the book tells me it's sudden and overwhelming. And that's exactly what my experience was. I'd been there maybe about 2 weeks, and I was upstairs. It was mid to late February at the time, maybe early March, and it was a real summer day in the middle of a spring situation. I had the windows open. I was in a room that they used to call the penthouse, because there were 4 of us up there, and we actually had a bathroom in the room instead of having to go out into the hall to use the bathroom. And my 3 roommates were gone. Had the windows open, beautiful blue sky, birds, squirrels, all the sounds and noises that you would hear. And I'm working on my 3rd step assignment. And all of a sudden, it was as if someone, if you were listening to a radio, slowly turned the radio down, and the sounds disappeared. And the next thing that went was the sights. It was as if someone dunked me in a glass of milk because everything was white. And the next thing that happened to me was I felt this warm sensation. Didn't hear any voices, didn't get any words of wisdom about some path to follow, but the conclusion that I was able to draw with my counselor at that time was, hey, that's just God letting you know it's going to be all right. So I bought into that. And I also learned one of my first lessons about spirituality and things of that nature. I learned that you can actually run people out of a room, tell them about a spiritual experience too, especially if it's the seventh day and you're telling the same story. You walk through the door, they're gone. They've already heard it. And the lesson there is that I can't live today on yesterday's food. That was meant for me, meant to be shared, the hope, but that's all it was. I met a kid that came in about 2 weeks behind me there. I say a kid, I was 37 when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. He was 58 years old at the time. And he was 2 weeks behind me, and he was probably about 19 or 20 years old. He was a death metal rocker. And when that book says we are people who normally wouldn't mix, it ain't kidding. And for some reason, we just came together. I know that because about 4 months after I'd gotten out of the treatment center, I got a call from the gal that actually gave me this book that I carry, Jan. And Jan was actually about my age now. And we all went through together. And he'd gotten himself into a relationship, messed himself up, was drinking again. And she wondered if she'd let him stay on her couch for a while. And it's been a few days. And she wondered if I would come over and talk with him. Well, no one had asked me to do anything for AA yet. I'm 4 months sober. I'm just smart enough, just dangerous enough for myself and for other people. So I said, of course, I'll come over there. And when I hung up the phone, fear ran into me like it had never run into me before. I wished I'd read another chapter of the big book that morning. I wished I'd read more of the Bible and other spiritual things, all the stuff that I thought that I needed to do to prepare myself to go over there and talk with someone who needed my help. I went out the front door with a stack of books under my arm looking like I was a college student. Dressed kind of like this, driving across town in my recovery mobile. I say that because I used to pull into a gas station and I'd fill it up with oil and put 2 gallons of gas in it. And it had 4 wheels though, not 2. And all the way across Abilene, I'm heading over to this to her house, and I'm saying, God, what am I going to say to this kid? God, what am I going to say to this kid? And about the time I rounded the end of the street where she lived, this still small voice said, Peter, you've been talking all your life, and you haven't said a damn thing. All I want you to do is be with the boy. And this sudden relief just came over me like I don't have to do anything except show up. So I get there and I get out of the car, the tie comes off, the coat goes in the back seat, the books stay in the car, and I walk up to the door, and just a great big hug, and he had a lot of things to say, so I piled him into the car and I headed out to this lake on the north side of town where we did a lot of 5th steps. And you know, he talked all the way out there. And I got to sit there and nod my head and occasionally say yes. He would ask a question, he would answer his own questions. The answers would be coming right out of here. I didn't have to do anything. I think that was my God doing for me what I really needed to have done. That would be a little bit of right sizing at that particular point. My sponsor used to take me on 12-step calls with him. That's when they were not, we had treatment centers, we had detox centers, but we were out in the oil fields, we were out on ranches. We went out to one, Mickey would disappear for a while out there, and we'd get a call from his wife, and he'd be living in a trailer about this size, tending about 50 square miles of pump jacks. And she wouldn't hear from him for 3 or 4 days, and then she'd call Bill. And Bill called me for the first time. I was probably somewhere around a year sober, so I'd been exposed to the Saturday night speaker meetings and a lot of the other things in AA. And so we went out there, and he's knocking on the door, Bill is, and nobody's answering, the lights are on, nobody's home, literally. And we hear this little commotion underneath the trailer. And he puts his ear down there and says, "I think he's under the trailer." I said, "Okay." And I just, "Okay." He says, "Well, why don't you go under there and talk to him?" I said, "Well, what do you want me to say?" He says, "Well, why don't you tell him what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now?" I said, "You want me to crawl under that trailer and give him a Saturday night talking?" He says, "No, you can shorten it up a little bit, just get him out from underneath the trailer." When I got under there, Mickey had a bag of crystal meth that was just about gone beside him, and he had about a half a fifth of Jack left in a case. And so he'd been under there for a while. And when we got Mickey out of there, Mickey likes to wear these belt buckles that are about that big around. And Mickey came out from underneath that trailer about 140 pounds. Mickey's running weight is about 5'10", about 200 pounds. And it's amazing to watch someone in that physical condition change and come back over to the condition that he was in as a rancher and an oil man. I, too, was damn near dead when I got here. I didn't have much longer. That's what the physical examination told me when I was going into that Serenity house. I've had incredible experiences going through sobriety. You know, I'm going to share a couple of what I consider to be miracles, and I hope that mine pale compared to yours. I really do. I hope that you've got so much more ahead of you. But God has been really good to me. My youngest daughter was about 3 years old, and I found myself in between medical. I've told this story to some people. I found myself in between medical insurance. She was about 3.5, and she had tonsils or she had ear and throat problems. And every antibiotic began to fail on her, and they even went back to the old penicillin. And so we finally got a recommendation to a specialist. And well, I had decided, without counsel from my sponsor, that I was going to get whatever my daughter needed from any doctor, any hospital, and I'd take care of them on the backside, financially. Don't ever tell your sponsor what you're thinking if you don't want input. Because he looked at me and said, "Why don't you try telling the guy the truth?" Well, there's a novel thought. You know, an amoral person doing a moral thing. What's up with that? So I yielded, and we were in there for the examination, and the doctor came and opened up the door, and I need to talk with you for just a second. I said, "Baby, I'll be right back in. Just sit right there. I'm going to leave the door cracked." And I stood out there, and I told him what my condition was. Told him I'd do everything that I could as rapidly as I could to take care of this. He said, "Well, let's go on in there and find out what's going on." So anyhow, she just needed to have her tonsils and adenoids taken out. She had 3.5 years old. She was sucking the blinds off a wall. She sounded kind of like I do sometimes when I sleep now, you know. But so I went to the front desk to give them my token check for the day. And the receptionist looked up at me and said, "Mr. House, you don't owe us a dime. The doctor's going to do this pro bono." And I kind of feel about like I do right now, and probably a little more emotional. And I went home and I proceeded to call everybody I knew from AA and my family, tell them how good God is and how great the program is, and yada, yada, yada. Well, about 3 hours later, I get a phone call from a friend of his who happens to be the CFO of the hospital where the procedure will be performed. And he says, "I hear you're in a pickle. We'd like to donate the operating room." So, you know, it just goes on and on. Well, long story short, after all that's done, I did get a bill for about $300 from the anesthesiologist. And I want you to know But I bitched about that $300 to my sponsor for about 2 weeks. Never mind the thousands that they saved me, okay? I just want you to know that you never get really well. I think my sponsor said stay a little sick. It's good for you. Might enhance your communication with other people, too. So that's why I mentioned the sanity thing here, because that's an ongoing process. I said that God wasn't in my life and that we parted ways and all that good stuff, but there were 3 accidents that should have killed me. I just want to share this because I know that he had something in mind down the road. I was married to a pretty little gal, a good gal, one that I didn't deserve. And our car was in the shop, so I borrowed her mother's car. And I was driving down the road this way, and I ran a stop sign at about 35 miles an hour. And I don't know if you all know what snow plows look like that really do have plows on the front of them. Well, this one did not have a plow. It was being ferried for maintenance, and on the front of that is a 3-prong catch, bars. And I ran a stop sign, and he was doing about 40 miles an hour, so I was going that way 1 minute, and the next minute I was going that way at about 35 to 40 miles an hour. The 2 bars on the bottom went underneath my seat. The bar on the top came through the side of the car, knocked the headrest off the car, off the seat. The ambulance was, you fire guys are great. Firemen and ambulances beat the cops there all the time. I was in the ambulance and they were looking at me. I was unscathed. I looked at the med tech and said, what do I do now? She said, well, I guess you can go. So I walked away from the scene of the crime. And by the time they got to me the next day, there was nothing to test. So there's a consequence that I didn't have to deal with. About 10 days later, we lived in a house on a lake in Holland, Massachusetts. I call that my Paul Bunyan days. We were there for about 2 years. Downed a lot of trees. Had a nice wood stove to heat my house. Split all the lumber. Smoked a lot of pot. Ate a lot of cheese. Drank a lot of wine. And just really enjoyed myself. And but anyhow, about 10 days after that accident with the car, I was dropping about a 100-foot oak tree, and I needed a truck to haul the wood. So I borrowed her daddy's truck. Well, I got the tree to the ground all right. There were people looking out the window because I had a privacy fence here, and they were just wondering which way that puppy was going to fall, but it came down the way it should have, and I had about maybe about that much up to the corner there left with a short Y on it. And so I'm digging in and working this thing out, throwing wedges in, and I'm hearing a little cracking here and there, but it's not really coming down. So I decided to take a little break, and I sit in the cab of the truck, and I'm eating a little lunch, and all of a sudden it comes down right behind the cab, cuts the truck in half. Okay? We used to race back and forth between Springfield and Hartford, Connecticut, because the bars, there was an hour difference in the time the bars were open. Real rainy night one night, and I'm driving back to Hartford, Connecticut in my Bonneville with the tinted windows so dark they're illegal today to have your windows like that. And I passed a semi. I thought I passed a semi. And I'm coming back into the right lane, and I just clipped him with the right bumper. And I'm helicoptering in front of him down the highway. And I can hear the air brakes going off and everything else, the gear shifting behind me. And I'm helpless. There's nothing I can do because the road is that wet. Well, this car helicoptered over to the right-hand side of the road, off the road, up against the curb, facing the right direction, and came to a stop. And the truck went on by me. And I want you to know that I bragged about my driving skills to my friends after that accident, and the only person with driving skills was the guy in that truck. That's it. So I've had my near-death experiences and probably some others that I don't remember, but those I do recall. When I first sat down with my sponsor, I'll jump around a little bit in sobriety. And he lifted up this book and he said, this is the book that we're going to read, we're going to go through. And he said, in this book, it tells us what to do and how to do it, what not to do, and why not. And it'll also give you a little glimpse of your future. And the first thing that shot through my head was, we're going to need a bigger book. And I told him that about 3 days later. We were able to laugh at that. But he's right. Over the years, the hours that I've spent with him, the hours that I've spent with my sponsors today, or my sponsor today, the hours that sponsees spend with me reading this book, it just seems to go deeper and deeper. This is not a sprint, this is a marathon. He said we took a year to go through this book, actually through the first 164 pages, and then we did the 12 and 12 together too. And he said, this is a relationship building tool. I get to know you, you get to know me, and had I not gotten to a point where I could trust a man in this earth suit, I don't know that I'd have ever gotten into step 3 and maybe took a shot at letting a God step into my life, one that I'd known all my life. But, because you see, I heard a lot of things in churches that were never really said. But I needed to interpret them that way because my very survival depended upon it. And the reason why this book says be quick to recognize when church people are right. Of course, that was my out for this being a cult early on with my sponsor. And he said, Peter, don't you think that's pretty damn good advice for anybody? Be quick to recognize when anybody's right? I couldn't argue with that. So I thank God for a man that had the capacity and the knowledge and the wisdom to be able to walk me through this. We got to talking one time about, and I found this afternoon, I just like to go through my old stuff from time to time. We got to talking about this, was I born with it, is it genetic, is it this, is it that, you know, because he kept me right in the book as far as a spiritual malady. I don't need to understand what it is, I just need to do what the book tells me to do and my life gets better. But we were talking about it, the genetics one time, and he was always good at handing me envelopes with little pieces of paper in it, and he handed me this envelope. He said, it says, first came Adam, and then came Eve, whose lot in life was to conceive. Thus, with the effort of just these two, the population grew and grew. Because of much sin, God sent 40 days of rain. Those left on earth were washed down the drain. Noah and his family did the flood survive, so it became their lot to keep the human race alive. That answers the question, without being rash, about the genetics of William F. Nash. That was my sponsor, Bill Nash. So it's not about where I think this came from. It's not about what I think I have or don't have. I'm so grateful that I mentioned the restless, irritable, and discontent. Those are the only 3 things that I need to know about emotions in my life to know where I'm at. And I'm so glad that Bill and Bob gave those to us. Because those are the barometers that I can use to measure my current condition. Where am I at spiritually? You know, am I in a place where I come in here and I'm talking some good stuff out of the book, and then I go out there and get in that car and I play high beam tag all the way home with somebody because they want to shut the damn high beams off as soon as I think they should? I've done that. And so I'm not well. My sponsor told me this program is a tool that I can use to manage both my errors and my success. And the longer I'm sober and the longer I'm here, the more that is true. A couple other things. My stepfather had boundaries in place for me. He's a black belt in Al-Anon, never went to Al-Anon. And, but I think he did say he took Psychology 101 or something like that. I said, okay. So, but from the time I left home at about 17 and a half until, I'm going to say I was probably a little over 3 years sober. He was the one that, he literally told my mother that he could predict what I was going to do. I didn't know our behavior patterns were that predictable, but my fourth and fifth step sure did point that out to me. But when I sobered up, you know, I've heard it in here before, where's the ticker tape parade, I ain't drinking no more, and all that good stuff. Well, you know, the girls in my family, as in sisters and mom, oh, here he is, the prodigal son come home. The men in the family, we've seen this before. And so I was a little over 3 years sober. One of my sisters got married, and I flew out to Phoenix for that wedding. And I had dinner with my dad and his best friend. He's known him longer than I'm alive now, but anyhow, they never do that. This is something they do together. Wives and girlfriends never attended these dinners when they got together, but he invited me there. Now here's a man that had all these boundaries in place, knew what alcohol did to me. I'm a little over 3 years sober, and I sit down to dinner with these two men, and my father looks at me and says, "You going to have a glass of wine tonight? You've been sober over 3 years. You probably do a glass of wine." Wow. Is my disease not cunning, baffling, and powerful? Probably one of the men solely responsible for allowing me to crash and burn. Never bailed me out of jail, never bought me a car, never sent me money. He let me sit where I was at. And he says that to me at 3.5 years. That same restaurant would play a role in my life probably about 7 or 8 years later. No, about 6 years later. I'd moved out to Phoenix for about a year. My family just imploded. And I was away from my home group in Abilene, Texas, and I just, I didn't know what to do. So I did what all intellectual alcoholics do. We isolate and get the hell away from all you folks that can help me. I don't make any phone calls. I don't do anything. And about 90 days into this catastrophe, I'm ready to drink. Well, I knew that this restaurant that I had dinner with my dad at was a reservations-only restaurant, and that if you went in there without a reservation, they put you in the bar until a table came up. See, I didn't even have the courage to go buy my own damn alcohol. I was going to blame it on somebody else, my relapse. And so I'm driving up Scottsdale Road. It took me about 35 minutes to get to this restaurant. And God, the liquor lights are getting brighter and brighter all the way up there. And I get to this restaurant, and I go through the front door. And I said, the pretty little college gal is the hostess that night, standing behind something like this, only a little bigger. And I looked at her, and I said, you know, I don't have a reservation here tonight, but I sure would like to have a meal. And she looked at me, and she said, stand right there. I'll be right back. And she went around behind the partition, and she was gone for maybe 30 seconds. And she came back around that partition, and she said, I can seat you. Not only did I get a table, but I got the table with the big windows overlooking the lake with the tiki torches out behind it. And that is where this book says, there will come a time when the only thing that stands between you and that drink is that relationship with that God of your understanding. That was definitely God doing for me what I could not do for myself. And my butt was back into that AA. As a matter of fact, my home group out there, I walked in there in my kind of dressed like this with a golf shirt, and I should have known the gig was up when I pulled in there. It was nothing but Harleys and all that stuff outside the building. I walked in there. I don't have any ink or art, but I'll tell you what. There was ink and art in that building, and I was just, snot was flying, tears were flying, and them biker guys just loved me to death and loved me back to health. One more short story about my father. When I was out there for that wedding, it was the last day before I was going to fly back the next day, and all the party was pretty much done. My sister was gone on her honeymoon, so on and so forth. There were about a dozen of us left, and we had one more meal or dinner at a steakhouse. And We were all out in the lobby because they were putting our reservation tables together. And the hostess called the house family, and my father looked at my mother and he said, you go on in there with the rest of them. I need to talk with Peter for just a second. I was sharing this with my mother the other day, and she'd never heard that. I thought I told her that. But anyhow, he pulled me aside and he looked at me and he said, I just want you to know that you've become everything in a son that a father could ever hope for. And it chokes me up to this day to say that, because this man adopted me. I'm not his blood. And he also looked at me and said, I'm no longer concerned about you. Now, the other 5 kids, I got some question marks about, but they're not drinkers and druggers. So, and I asked him, I said, well, what's the difference now? And he said, you're no longer predictable. You're spontaneous. And that's what this program has given me, spontaneity. It's given me that freedom from people, that fear of people and economic insecurity. My sponsor also cautioned me. He says, you may have freedom from that fear, but let me just warn you, the people aren't going away. And neither is the insecurity, financial stuff. Because I've had that hit me, both with a full wallet and a bank account, and an empty wallet and no bank account. So it's not about what's happening in my life that fear goes away. I don't know why that is, but it just is. But I continue to come here because you folks continue to set me free. I relearn what I forget. Sometimes I'm a giver, sometimes I'm a taker when I come in here. And I thank God you welcome me no matter what my condition is, because I truly do have no place else to go. I love you all. Thank you.